Welcome to Women in Focus. Last week we were talking to Mira, Sundra, Rajan, and it is but normal for me to continue the story if we can finish it in one session. So this is part 2 of Mira, Sundra, Rajan, who is a professor of law, and a special part of that law is copyright law. And we're going to get to the copyright law today, I promise you. But let's meet her. And Mira, thank you for staying and talking to us.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted.
When we were talking about your great-grandparents, then your grandparents, then your grandmother, your mother, and now we've come to your story. But we hadn't finished your mom's story. So do you want to finish that, and then we continue with your story? Because I want to talk about your life as to growing up. Were you born in India?
I was born in Canada, right in Burnaby, British Columbia.
No kidding. Okay, that alone, it's an amazing story. Okay, so let's just go back to your mother then.
Yes, absolutely. So as I was saying when we spoke last week, my mother was a very unique person in the family as well, because she had learned the oral tradition of Bharati's songs coming directly from the poet down through her mother and herself. Mm-hmm. And then she also studied for a PhD in Bharati literature and was the first person to do that. So she was the leading scholar of Bharati's works. And I used to say that if we could look at my mother's brain, we would see that there would be small words of the poet inscribed on all of the cells in her brain. Not very scientific. You know, my partner is a neuroscientist. I'm sure he would be both delighted and a little bit appalled by this description. But that was how completely immersed she was in her grandfather's writing and personality. She just was living that. She had such passion.
How did she get out of India and come to Canada?
Well, that was my father's fault.
Oh, I see. Okay. Let's bring him in.
Yes. My father also immensely influenced by Bharati, like a lot of people were, you know, at the time of Indian independence. So they were born just before. It's amazing to think that my parents were still born in Imperial India. But they got the independence very soon after that. And so he was actually an English scholar. And Bharati was a great lover of English literature as well.
Yes.
In fact, he took as his pen name when he was in younger days, Shelley Dawson, for the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Mm. And he admired the Ode to the West Wind of Shelley, was his great poem. Anyone who has read that poem will recognize, because that spirit, the freedom-loving spirit of the West Wind, I mean, that's Bharati. So my father was an English scholar, and he wanted to be in an environment where English was spoken as a first language and experience English from that perspective. At that time, they were starting up Simon Fraser University, a place about which I think you know not a little. And so he was invited to be part of the first graduating class. So he was already an English lecturer in India, but he came and did a second master's at SFU. And graduated before I was born in 1970. So that's what brought them to Canada. So she was curious about exploring the situation outside the country, and she had that pioneer spirit. So she said, okay, let's go have your English studies, and I'm going to see, you know, what is happening outside and what's going on in the West as well. So that's how they came here.
Beautiful. I want to talk about your journey as well. Whereas it hasn't been without struggle,
no.
You know, becoming a law professor and having so many firsts in your own life.
Yes.
But you had to go through those stumbling blocks and then be where you are today. But let's take a short break and come back. Mira is a Woman in Focus today. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Mira Sundra Rajan is our Woman in Focus today. So Mira, I stopped you at a very crucial point.
Yes.
And we talked about your own life. Your mom and dad had already come here. You were born here.
Yeah.
So born here in Vancouver?
Yeah, in
Or
Burnaby.
In Burnaby,
Yes.
wow.
I was an infant on Burnaby Mountain.
Isn't that just cute? So, was it the your great grandfather's story, your grandmother's, your mother's story that made you get into law and protective law? What was it?
That's exactly what it was.
It was, eh?
Yes, and I'm very glad that I had a chance to tell that story to you in some detail, because you remember I talked about my great-grandfather and the struggles he had to have his rights recognized.
Yes.
So what happened when India became independent? At that point, remember I mentioned when we spoke earlier that his works had not been published in full, and that his wife, his widow, then struggled to get them published. So finally what happened when India became independent, the government of Madras province, as it had been Madras state, Tamil Nadu, then decided that Bharati's works were so important that they had to be shared with the public of India widely, and they had to do something to help with the publication. A good idea in principle,
But not in practice.
not in practice at all. So what they did was they took over the copyright. And I hesitate to say that they purchased it, because the money that they paid for it was like next to nothing.
Yeah.
And nobody in the family blames the government for that, because I don't even know if they had the money, to be honest, at that point.
Right.
It was a very difficult moment.
No.
Nobody knew what the future held. So they took the copyright, they paid a little bit of money to Chellama and to the two daughters. In fact, there were some transactions in the family before then. I won't go into all that, but this is the essence of what happened. The government still felt that they had to recognize Chellama and the two daughters of Bharati. And then the government found that they couldn't publish the full works either. It was too much of a project for them. So what they did was they gave the copyright to the public of India as a gift.
Oh, wow.
So any Indian could publish those works lawfully. So in a way, it kind of makes sense, because Chellama Bharati's plan, which she wrote about, and she published her own words when she brought out those first books. And she said, after my death, it is my intention to bequeath Bharati's works to the public.
Public, okay.
So that mentality, I have to say, that has been so typical in my family, that my mother and father, grandmother and great-grandparents, they never thought about getting anything for themselves.
Yeah.
To a fault, actually,
Yes.
if anything.
Yes.
At the same time, Bharati was very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
He wanted to publish his own collected edition. He talks about, he has a letter that he circulated to people asking for sponsorship.
Yeah.
He wanted to create what he called novel and American-like binding of the books.
I so recognize myself with him.
Absolutely. I think every Indian, every person of Indian origin today would definitely see themselves in Bharati.
So all that,
Yeah.
the family's great giving nature
Yes.
brought this question of copyright
Yes.
law into your life.
Exactly. And so I never thought that I would study copyright law.
But you're the greatest in that particular field.
I have achieved a high level of expertise in
Yes.
that.
And I think the credit can go to the whole family for that.
Absolutely correct. Because the very first thing I got interested in, really interested in law, not just in copyright, was Bharati's copyright. And in fact, I had a wonderful professor in law school who was teaching copyright law. And I had no particular interest. I didn't understand at that time, that this has anything to do with copyright. And so I happened to be in his class because he had a good reputation as a professor amongst the students. They said, yeah, he's a nice man. He's got a good sense of humor. He's fair. He's interesting. Okay, I'll also take his class. How we do things as students, sometimes it's mind-boggling. But when I got into his class, he gave an opportunity to write a paper. And I thought, oh my God, here I am in this thing now. I know nothing about this. What am I going to do? Then I was talking to him one day. I just dropped by his office and said, oh, Professor, yeah. And I was talking, and I kind of mentioned about my family, and his ears kind of pricked up. So, oh, that sounds like that might be a story about copyright.
Yeah.
And that was it.
That was it. That was the catalyst.
That was the catalyst. So I wrote a study. The first academic study, in English for sure, and I think in any language, of Bharati's copyright. And I got all the information from that, all the background from my mother's research, including, you know, original documents, contracts that Chellamma Bharati had signed, and all these things. I wrote that paper and I published that paper, which was still written when I was a student. And that is a rare thing, you know, to have an important piece of scholarship.
Yeah.
And any paper, but especially something significant like this. So that started me on that road. And I specialized in not only copyright, but an aspect of copyright called the moral rights of authors, which is a very funny name, but it means something very simple, which is you, when you write something, so Bharati wrote his poems,
Right.
he has a right to be recognized as the person who wrote those poems. This is a problem because people find other poems and they say, oh, Bharati wrote this, and then everybody learns about that.
Right, right.
But that's not right,
No.
because he didn't write it.
No.
And it affects his reputation and his
That's
legacy.
right. Yes.
So preserving the legacy means preserving what did Bharati actually write? What did he actually say? It's so important because he said very unpopular things. You know, he said people of all castes should eat together. He said they should eat together and they should intermarry. Commensality and intermarriage. And that is the only way to get rid of the caste system.
Yes.
I'm saying this on your program, and I know that there will be people watching who find this a little bit surprising. But we have to know that that's what he said because he was a great visionary and we're going to benefit from that.
For sure.
And we have to know that he said that,
Yes.
not somebody else. And he didn't say something else. He said this. That's what moral rights are about. So you preserve the attribution of the works and you preserve the integrity of the works. Don't change Bharati's words. You can't take out that he said people should marry from different castes. If you take that out, you're removing his thought, his idea. You cannot do that. And that's something called the moral right of integrity of the author.
Isn't that beautiful?
It's a great thing in law. It's a legal tradition that in the modern iteration that started in Europe and spread all over the world, when India got their first copyright law, which was in 1957, they adopted this moral rights idea and made it a very foundational part of Indian copyright law. Because India had great lawyers in those days,
Right.
visionaries who wanted to set up a system to recognize the contribution of Indian authors and artists who suffered so much and gave everything. Bharati literally gave his life. And honestly, the people who came afterwards in the family,
Yeah.
they did almost as much as him. Chellamma Bharati did as much as him in her own
Right.
role.
Yes.
And so, you know, that's what the Indian legislators who made the Indian Copyright Act, they said, okay, we're going to recognize that and show that we value these people, not only by ensuring that they get paid for their work, you know, which is a question of basic dignity.
Right.
You know, my great-grandparents lived without enough rice in the house,
Right.
and it was an affront to their dignity, and they've both spoken and written about that. But also this, that their work and their names should be protected forever.
I think the main thing that it not only should be protected, but it is their work and should not be plagiarized.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I want to come to the point where you yourself, in your own work, have been
Yeah.
marginalized because of being a visible minority.
Yeah.
But let's take a short break and come back. Your last story is going to be only 4 minutes, but you will have to tell it.
Okay.
Mira is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Our Woman in Focus today is Mira Sundra Rajan. We're talking about copyright law. Now, Mira, you became a law professor in UBC as well,
Yes.
but you were not treated properly.
No, I had an absolutely horrible experience at UBC.
Awful experience.
Yes, the worst experience of my life. It was so bad that my mother called it like a death. And my father had died recently, and that was that actually gave the university an opportunity to exploit me further at a time when I was emotionally vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother called it another death. That is how bad the situation was at UBC. I was an extremely distinguished professor at UBC. In fact, I don't like to blow my own horn, but at the same time, I have to pay tribute to my ancestors and say that I started on this path.
Yes, because of them.
Because of them entirely. And I got to be a very prominent person in the field of copyright law scholarship. My work is known all over the world. I did my PhD at Oxford, and leading specialists supervised me and continue to support my work. Anyone who works in copyright law, I think, should know a little bit about me through my work, at least.
Right.
And I had achieved a lot of this already when I started as an assistant professor of law at UBC. I was recruited from Oxford, and I came here because they said, oh, we have a great thing. We have a Canada Research Chair opportunity for you to apply. You have to apply. You have to be nominated and get the award of the chair, which can be given for 10 years, 5 years, then it's renewed. It's worth $1 million Canadian.
Wow.
So I was also the cheapest employee, one of the 2 cheapest employees, possibly the cheapest ever at UBC Law School, because my salary was primarily paid by the Canada Research Chairs program. The university takes the money. I mean, we could have a separate show to talk about what's wrong with the Canada Research Chairs program. This is it. You as the candidate have to succeed.
Yes.
It's an extremely rigorous process. There's hundreds of pages of nominations, external referee. It is way more rigorous than a tenure process, if you can imagine.
Wow.
You do all that, and then they give the money to the university for you. Okay.
That $1 million goes to the university, and you get how much out of the $1 million?
Well, it was paid towards my salary, so I got nothing out of the $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah. But UBC got a great discount on me. And let us not fail to mention in your show, if I say anything today, I want to say this, that is taxpayers' money, Shushma.
Wow.
BC taxpayers, Canadian taxpayers. Their money is being taken by UBC Law School and being used by them to promote a discriminatory, hateful agenda where any minority professor, I was one of 2. I don't speak about Indigenous law, which is another issue.
Oh,
I was one
huge issue.
Yeah. So I was one of 2 minority programs in a faculty of about 40 people. I was one of 2 minority professors. The other one was a Chinese American. And I was one of 2 professors who had the Canada Research Chair. The other person whose name you might know is Catherine Dauvergne.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another discussion. So this was the situation when I worked at UBC, and I had an outstanding time there as a professor. I was nominated for teaching awards. I published world-leading scholarship. I'm now about to publish the 2nd edition of my Oxford University Press book called The Moral Rights of Authors and Artists from the Birth of Copyright to the Age of Artificial Intelligence. It is a 330,000 word long book about this issue.
Holy mackerel.
And the first edition of that was, coming out when I was at UBC. It got published right after I resigned from UBC. I resigned right after getting my Canada Research Chair renewed. I gave back $500,000 in funding, $490,000 for my salary, went into UBC's research pot of money. UBC needs to be, let me just say one more thing.
Yes.
I went to every level of the university when I had problems there because I was concerned about the university's money. I had nothing to lose. I got tenure, which is based on an external process, although they delayed it for a year, and the university was going to lose $500,000, that second grant, and have to pay my salary. And I was worried about that, although they were not. I went to the dean of the law school. She was the problem. An American who now teaches at Emory Law School, a place known for racism against blacks in particular, Black Americans. Marianne Bobinski, let me say her name as well. I went from her to David Farrar, who was then the provost. He was backing her up. I went to John Hebburn, who was the VP Research, who told me to suck it up. And that is a direct quote, because I would never use language like that in a professional setting. I went to the president of the university, Stephen Toop, who I knew from McGill days. He is a human rights lawyer. He refused to meet with me to find out what was going on.
And your human rights did not matter to him?
Absolutely not. And I wrote a resignation letter because finally my mother said to me, Mira, you have a great future ahead of you. You have to watch your health. You have to watch your reputation. Get out of there. He accepted a letter of resignation in which I said, I'm resigning against my will. I have no desire to leave UBC. So I actually don't consider myself to have left UBC because such a letter is illegal in Canada. I've since discovered it violates employment law. So I am still a UBC employee and I'm waiting for my salary and my pension to be paid. This is my position. I finally sued UBC, and it's going through the motions for more than a decade now. We can do another show about the human rights system. It's broken.
It is. But you know what? I think you're going to win.
Shushma, the day I walked out of UBC and didn't look back, I won.
Yes.
Because my priority, fortunately for me, I think, is not how big my bank account is. There are things that are more important to me.
Yeah.
I kept my professional integrity, and I kept my commitment to the values that have been so important to my family for so many generations. But I wanted to speak out about this because it is Canadian public, Canadian taxpayers, that's to say my parents. You know, they paid taxes in this country for so many decades. So I want people to know, and I want them to demand the accountability, because UBC is a corrupt institution, right from the tenured professors right up to the level of the president.
Wow.
And they ensure that anyone else who comes into the university fits right into their culture.
As corrupt as they are.
Yeah, and this must stop, because it is our youth. I want to be at UBC teaching right now, but I can't. And it is the young people who could have been educated by me. People use words, they say nice things about my teaching. Students say that I've changed their lives, that I'm an inspiring professor, that I'm the best professor that they've ever had. Well, that could have been your kid that got to be taught and trained by me and by other people like me, who I have no doubt are out there in our community and in every community. And we must demand accountability so that our country can flourish. That's what diversity is about. It's about getting the best people, regardless of skin color, gender. Who cares about that stuff? It is about getting the best people and about flourishing as a community. We've got to do what's necessary for that, and I am so determined to speak out about this.
Good. And I'm glad that we got an opportunity to talk about this.
I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you for being a woman in focus today. Mira Rajan has been a woman in focus today. We've left many, many questions unanswered and many areas that need work to be done. So hopefully, when you're watching this program, you're thinking about it and you will do something about it too. We'll be right back.